And welcome to another one of our webinars in relation to the impacts of COVID-19 on the business community. And I hope everyone's looking after themselves out there, both in a physical sense and also mental state of health, because I don't have to tell you that these are very testing times, and what we are experiencing in terms of lockdown and self-isolation is so out of step with our natural Aussie psyche, which is catching up with friends and family and mates, and our love of sport and outdoors, and it's basically been taken away from us for the moment. And so stuff that we've taken for granted, and of course what we're seeing is when we throw in on top of that financial pressures, such as paying bills and keeping the business doors open and looking after our family and team, can lead to situations that we normally don't find ourselves in. So that's where we believe that we can help you, in that just we're here for someone to talk through the financial issues, take away some of that anxiety around financial or business issues, and that's why we're making ourselves available through webinars and phone and emails. So here we are again. Right now we're up to Pussy's bow, basically, in JobKeeper enrolments and cash flow boosts through the BAS and apprentice subsidies and government grants, just to name a few. But today's going to be a slight change on what we've been doing, change of pace. It'll only be a 5-minute webinar, still COVID-19 related, and it's still extremely important because, especially those people who pay rent or lease payment to a landlord, and landlords who are collecting rent and lease payments, quite stressful. So we are joined today by Adrian Sacco, Director of One Agency Real Estate Sunbury, and Adrian's going to help us go through and talk to some about the issues about being a tenant and a landlord in this current environment. So welcome to the webinar, Adrian.
Oh, welcome everybody. Thanks for inviting me along to this, Michael. Hopefully some of the information we provide can give some people some direction and a bit of help.
I've no doubt it will help. So let's get straight into it. Adrian, if some of our listeners are commercial tenants or commercial landlords, what should the overriding approach be right now?
The whole overriding approach is based around communication. Right? That's probably the most important thing that people have got to remember. There is a code of conduct, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But if you, for example, if you're a commercial property owner, so you're a landlord, right? The sensible approach for you today would be to help your tenant trade out, especially if they're a good tenant, because you want them there for the long haul, right? Because I can tell you one thing at the moment, trying to release a property in today's market, especially from a commercial perspective, is going to be more difficult than it ever has been. Okay, you take somebody, for example, who's already a good number of properties that have been untenanted for quite a while. So you really have to remember that that's probably one of the most important things. So compassion and empathy for your tenant and working alongside them is probably the best way to handle that side of it. Now, if you're a tenant, there are a couple of things you should be focusing on. One is to try and obviously meet your rent where you can, and there are going to be some that are heavily affected, that are going to find it more difficult. You need to be communicating that straight away to your landlord as early as possible, because you don't want to leave things to the last minute, because the problem is usually a lot bigger at the last minute. The second is that you have to look at your cash flow, because that's going to be very important, and rent is usually a substantial amount of that. And then you have to take a look at your business model. Now, I've spoken to a lot of local businesses, as you have, Michael, and we talk about how they're adapting their business models. I was talking to an owner of a local business, and she's moved her shop to online. She's doing tutorials for makeup and for beauty, and that's a really good example. I've spoken to a number of the restaurants and cafes, and they're transitioning their model to do a lot more deliveries. So staff that they've had employed waiting tables are now delivering to people's homes. But the most important thing here is have a clear business plan for trading through.
Yeah. You touched on their communication, Adrian. I think that's so important. I've been talking to a few clients who maybe are okay now, but we don't know how long these lockdown provisions are going to be in place. So it might be two to 3 months, and we need to talk to our landlord. So communication is key. You know, going to your landlord now and saying, I'm okay for the moment, you know, as you said, I love being here and I want to be here when we come out the other side. But you know, should I need some assistance, how are we going to discuss this? And you touched on before there's a code of conduct that Prime Minister brought out on the 7th of April. What were the key points of that code of conduct, Adrian?
There are 14 principles in the code of conduct in all, and basically they include landlords must not terminate leases for non-payment of rent during COVID-19, right? Or a reasonably determined recovery period. Tenants must stay committed to their leases, subject to any amendments that they may negotiate. You know, whether that's deferrals, whether that's a period of grace or rent reduction. Landlords must offer reductions in rent or waivers or deferrals based on a tenant's reduction in trade. So that doesn't mean that any tenant can rock up to their landlord and say, yeah, you know, COVID-19's here. I need a rent reduction, right? The underlying principle here is that the tenant has suffered a drop in their income, usually in excess of 30%. That's the underlying principle about it. The other one is that the other thing that the code covers is the benefits for owners that they get for their property, and that could be a bit of land tax relief, deferred loan payments, and where they're getting this, they should be utilising this to support the tenants. That's the underlying principles of the code of conduct.
Yes, it is difficult to trade off because you've got on one side the landlord, and say for example you touched on 30%. You know, a good example would be if you've applied for the JobKeeper reimbursement, then you may have a JobKeeper number, so you can provide that to your landlord to say that you've dropped by at least 30%. There's evidence, and I don't know if it's changed, Adrian, but you know, if, for example, 30% is the figure, I was reading that at least half of that 30% can be waived, and the other half of the 30%, say, would be deferred and paid back at a later time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. And usually, and on the back of that too, is that where it's deferred, is the lease period then comes into question as well. So if there's a reasonable amount of time for that deferred payment to be paid back. And they're saying at the moment that the guide is about 2 years, about 24 months at the moment. And it's also about, like, if you've basically done this for 6 months, and you can actually extend the lease, you should be allowing an extension of the lease for 6 months.
Yeah, I think we'll see a bit of ebb and flow there as you know, time goes by. There'll be some variation, but there is that code of conduct, and certainly the overriding code of conduct on the commercial side of things, and what I've also seen on the residential side, is that the tenants must continue to pay their rent. That's the overriding factor, but communication between tenant and landlord is paramount to work out what's an appropriate rate of rent, because on the landlord side of things, we've still got there's still bills to pay. And if we go to our banks and say, look, we'd like to put a moratorium on the loans, well, guess what? They're not actually wiping that interest off. We're still got to pay that back. So works both ways. So
yeah, well, and that's back-ended, and that actually adds a significant cost to it as well. It's not, like you said, it's not anything that's free. Residential is a little bit different. Residential has been about 80 billion that's been allocated towards that. And I think the most important thing is that there's a fixed amount of money, you know, for rent relief that's been provided by the government, and people have got to understand that that's got to go around. So there are people, we will see some people that will apply for a reduction in rent from their landlords on the residential side where nothing's actually changed for them. Well, that's actually not acceptable, really. You know what I'm saying? So
it's not in the spirit of you know, the handouts. It's not the right thing to do, is it? I think there was 3 key guidelines where I think I saw about the residential component, Adrian.
Yep.
What were they? They were basically that, you know, yes, you still got to pay, but rent, there's a ratio of 30%. So your rent really should be, if it's under 30%, you've really got no right to sort of ask for handouts and things like that.
That's correct. You know, if nothing's changed in your job situation or your income, that's definitely, you should still be paying your rent. Absolutely.
Yep.
You also, what a lot of other people fail to see is that a lot of landlords who've got mortgages against their properties that they're providing for people to be able to rent and have a roof over their head. So they've got commitments that can't necessarily always be deferred, and it's still costs it, and they've still got to pay those. So either way, you've got to still commit to paying that rent, or you might be deferring the rent. There's a number of options that are available. I've got a couple of landlords that have assisted a few genuine cases, and it's fantastic to see locals supporting locals within the community. But we've also had a couple that have had what I'd say a non-common sense approach to it.
Yeah. Okay. So there are some guidelines, and to be honest, it's the code of conduct, and I've read quite a bit of legislation lately. The code of conduct is actually quite succinct and sets it out quite well compared to a lot of the other legislation and guidelines, such as JobKeeper and things like that. So to read through that, it does provide some clarity, which is great. So one final question, Adrian. Say landlord, tenant, they're following the guidelines of communicating, looking at the code of conduct. What happens if one party decides not to play ball and says, I don't care what the code of conduct says, I either want my rent paid for, or the other side, I refuse to pay any rent? What happens then?
Right, okay, so the code of conduct's quite clear in what it steps out, and it says, where landlords and tenants can't reach an agreement, say on a temporary lease arrangement that embodies the principles of this code of conduct, either party has the option to refer in their local state, territory, or wherever it is for mediation. And there's a number of ways that mediation can take place. And they're looking at that being binding mediation, and then they both have to abide by it. Okay. So if they can't reach it, if they can't mediate between themselves, then the next option is to go to an independent mediator to set it out. And they have to bear in mind that process will be binding.
Okay. Good advice. So basically, I think overall, as you say, as we've said for most of our webinars, it's all about the preparation. You've got to prepare for certain circumstances. If COVID-19 has taught us nothing else, it should be that we should, as business owners, as even our own lives, as we're running little businesses as a family unit, we should be prepared for something like this. So be prepared. I think we've covered off quite well on all the key points, Adrian. Is there anything you'd like to just touch on before we sign off and let everyone get back to?
I think people have to understand it. Like in Victoria, only 4% of our GDP is manufacturing. So it may take us a bit longer to pick up, say, or to trade out of it, compared to somewhere like WA, where mining and manufacturing and mining is a lot higher. So that'll be something that people need to understand. That there'll probably be a big shift in technology at the end of this. So a lot of people that have now adopted online technology platforms, whether it's for food delivery, whether it's for real estate agents doing 3D walkthroughs and other forms of technology for online auctions and stuff like that. Technology is probably one of our sectors that's actually going to pick up the fastest coming out of this, because people are now going to be more reliant on it. Yeah, and in terms of our local home prices, well, one of the things I want to highlight is Sunbury's kind of in a unique, and Sunbury, Macedon Ranges, and kind of is in a unique pocket right now. Yeah, we're going to be affected. We're affected by the activity at the airport, because a large proportion of people are employed in airport-related services and other types of services. Most important thing to remember is one of the things that I'm seeing as an agent is buyer activity change and buyer criteria change. So we've still got buyers coming into the market. It's just at a much lower pace. If the wheel was moving at 100k an hour, it's probably moving at about 10k an hour at the moment. Now, what that is, it still brings buyers in, so that we're still seeing things transact left and right, so buy and sell. But what you'll find on buying criteria, and I've already seen it, is that people that have been forced into working from home, locked up at home, only travelling for essential services, are now developing a different appreciation for space, open spaces. We're seeing a lot, I don't know if you've noticed it, but I'm definitely seeing a lot more people walking on the street and exercising, even when I'm driving in the morning. I'm definitely seeing driving home at night and seeing neighbours chatting to neighbours over the fence, right? Stuff that I grew up with that I think we're missing for 20, 30 years. So Sunbury's very, very lucky in that respect, in that we've got a very good diverse mix of land sizes, home sizes. We've got estates like Emu Bottom where we've got acreage, we've got Jackson's Hill where we've got bigger blocks of land. We've got even some of the newer estates like Rosenthal has a mix of different properties. So what I think you'll find is that people that have been are apartment living, small home living, will probably make a decision to sell and purchase because they want more open space where they may not have been considering that. For that reason, I think the lower end of the market will take the first hit in Sunbury, but I think that the mid-market will be quite strong. And then on the back of that, I'll see that I think the higher end of the market will eventually pick up, but that'll be determined what the high end of the market, say in places like Essendon, Munich Ponds and Taylor Lakes and Caroline Springs does, as it pushes buyers out our way who aren't looking for as much congestion. You've got to remember, we've got a lot of walking tracks. We've got a beautiful lake. We've got the open spaces where the gateway to the Macedon Ranges. So we offer lifestyle. And I think for that, I see Sunbury will be affected by price, but I don't think it'll be as affected by price as the inner Melbourne will be. The big question is how long is it going to be before we can trade out of it? And I don't think anyone can really answer that at the moment.
No, it's a wait and see, I think, for the moment, but it all depends on what the governments do around us. So thank you for that insight, Adrian. I think we'll wrap it up there.
No problem.
We've covered quite a bit. If there are any specific questions, please whack them on the chat line and we'll come back to you. If you'd like any to direct any other questions, direct to ourselves. You know where we are, and if you want any questions for Adrian, on Agency Sunbury. So thank you for listening, everyone, and thank you once again, Adrian. And stay safe out there, and hopefully, as you say, we trade through this quicker than not. Thanks, Adrian.
You're welcome.
See you later.
See ya. You there, Mike?
Yep.
Have they stopped recording?
I know. I think so. I think Tim
I can still see the record button up there anyway.
We'll crop that out. I'm sure.
Is that all right?
Yeah. Oh, Rod's still online. Hey, Rod, you can hop off, mate. We'll close it down. I think Tim will close it down. We'll catch up.
Yeah, no problems.
Good idea. Thanks, Adrian.
You're welcome.
See ya.
Even though you've purchased it, it actually has to be installed and ready to use by 30 June. So it applies to new and used assets. So it's not